And as a school of education, as a result of what we call the two pandemics, COVID and racial injustice and our racial reckoning, we as a school of education expanded our core values to include being an anti-racist learning community. And we recommitted ourselves to exploring and acting upon big ideas in education, particularly those areas such as early childhood education, special education, teacher and school leader preparation, international and global education, and ed policy and leadership. We've had speakers such as John B. King, the former U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration. And we've also had Cynthia Miller Idris, an AU professor and expert on white nationalism. And we're continuing tonight with another wonderful speaker, Dr. Gregory Hutchings, who is also the superintendent from Alexandria City Schools. And I just can't wait to hear his conversation tonight that is aligned with his new book that will be coming out soon, Getting into Good Trouble at School, a Guide to Building an Anti-Racist School System. The facilitator of tonight's conversation is Dr. Felton Moss. He's a senior professorial lecturer of education policy and leadership here at American University. He is also a senior TA consultant at the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at American Institutes for Research, or what we typically call AIR. He's a former high school English teacher from Greenwood, Mississippi, where he was the Teacher of the Year for 2 consecutive years and a core member of Teach for America. This is going to be a great conversation with 2 great education leaders. Before we get started, a couple of important housekeeping notes. This session, as you probably just heard, will be recorded and will be made available on our school's YouTube page, so check it out. If you want to see other big idea conversations, they're also on our YouTube page, so please check that out. We also have no audio features tonight, but you can use the chat feature to talk to one another, to share ideas, to ask questions. And we will be going through those questions and we will pose those questions at the end of our session tonight. Dr. Moss will take those questions and ask Dr. Hutchings at the last portion of the hour. Also, if you're interested in graduate studies and education policy and leadership, or more specifically, what we're talking about tonight, anti-racist school leadership and administration, we do have a certificate in it and we want you to check it out. If this is something that you want to study further, please check out our website and contact information, and we'll be happy to tell you more about our programming. So enough about me. Enough of me talking to you. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Moss, who will introduce Dr. Hutchings from Alexandria City Schools. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Moss.
Thank you, Dean Holcomb McCoy. It is indeed a privilege to be here tonight and to be able to facilitate this conversation with Dr. Gregory Hutchings. We are just honored to be in company tonight. Dr. Hutchings is an experienced educator and administrator. He has served as a teacher, an assistant principal, and principal at the middle and high school levels. I don't know about you, but I love middle school, having served in one as well. So I'm excited to hear him talk about middle school a bit. He also began his teaching career in Manassas at Prince William County Public Schools and has worked in Chesterfield County Public School District near Richmond and has served in Nashville Public Schools in Tennessee. It is when he was in Tennessee and Nashville schools that he earned the distinction of Tennessee Middle School Principal of the Year by the Association of Middle Schools in Tennessee for his role in increasing student achievement and becoming the #1 middle school in metropolitan Nashville based on the value add model. But today, Dr. Hutchings serves as superintendent of the Alexandria City Public Schools, and we are excited to hear him talk about his work and his key takeaways and learnings as he led as superintendent of Alexandria City Schools with the anti-racism at his core. And so he actually calls this twin pandemics as well. And so we are excited to learn the ways in which he has done this work. Not only that, We hope tonight he'll give us a preview of his book that's coming out called Getting into Good Trouble at School, a guide to building anti-racist school systems, and really focuses on 6 steps to really building an anti-racist school or school system. He also has a podcast. Maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that tonight, called Unapologetic Talk with the Soup, that can be found all over social sites. So I'm actually not going to belabor the time here. I'm actually going to give Dr. Hutchings an opportunity to provide us with a brief keynote. Followed by that, we've curated 6 questions that we believe will explore the ways in which Dr. Hutchings have led in his local school district. And then we'll entertain some questions from each of you who are participating tonight. So Dr. Hutchings, the floor is yours at this time. I cannot wait to learn from you and to engage in a discussion shortly after your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Moss, and also thank you to Dean Holcomb McCoy for this opportunity. I'm just excited. Anytime we're talking about anti-racism in education, which is my passion, I really believe that this is what I'm supposed to do in regards to my career. Once a teacher, always a teacher. I'm glad that you shared that I was a teacher first, because a lot of times people forget that superintendents were educators, and we were in the classroom, and I still actually teach at Georgetown right now. I teach a course called Intergovernmental Relations in Education at Georgetown University in their master's program. So I have a few slides that I'm going to go through for the beginning portion, and I know we have some Q&A that we're also going to go through. But I always like to start anytime I have an opportunity to speak to anyone across this country. I like to start off with who we are in Alexandria City Public Schools, because a lot of times people have a misunderstanding of the population we serve and who we represent. The city of Alexandria, as many people know, it's predominantly white. It's one of the richest communities, I think, in the nation. However, our school system is predominantly Black and brown. 70% of our students are Black and brown. We have 61% of our students who are eligible for free and reduced meals. And a lot of times people are shocked by that because of the wealth that we have in the city of Alexandria. However, the students that we serve, they come from different walks of life. Over 30% of our students are eligible for English learner services. And this is why the work that we're doing right now in regards to our anti-racism in education is so important. And I wanted to give you all some context as to why this work is important for us in Alexandria City Public Schools. I always want to start with our mission and our vision. Of course, you know, as educators and all those educational leaders out there, if you do not have a vision statement or a mission statement for your school or school system, that is a very serious problem, because people don't understand what you stand for and what you're striving to do as you move forward throughout your journey. But this is just, you know, a quick shot of what we stand for in Alexandria City Public Schools, and making sure that all of our students, that they're thriving in this diverse and ever-changing world. And who would have thought with COVID that, you know, we would be ever-changing so soon, but we are resilient and we will continue to move forward. We're also about removing barriers from in regards to our students and their learning. These are just our core values. I won't go through each one of those. I just wanted to flash them because I am representing our school system, which I'm also a product of. And I think any opportunity we get is important for people to know kind of who we are and what we stand for. So let's talk about the dual pandemic, right? And this, right, every time I see this particular slide, because I'm able to do presentations across the country quite often, it just brings me back to George Floyd and how we were all dealing with this whole racial reckoning across our country. And we're doing this simultaneously as we are dealing with this pandemic, meaning the COVID-19 global pandemic that we're all have been pretty much forced into over the past 2 years. And what we are saying in Alexandria City Public Schools is that this is our opportunity to make sure that, yes, we are trying to make sure we have all these health and safety mitigations in regards to COVID, but that we're also addressing the systemic racism that we know has been around the United States of America for over 400 years. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about Black fatigue. And you all said I could be real tonight, so I can only be me. I tell folks all the time, the best person you can be is yourself. And tonight I get to be my unapologetic self. I'm my unapologetic self every day. But I like to start off with the definition of Black fatigue, because I can't speak for all Black people, across this country, but I can tell you from my point of view, it has been fatiguing over the past several years, especially just lately over the past 2 years with this work. And that's one of the reasons why I was inspired to write the book, Getting into Good Trouble at School, with my co-author, Dr. Doug Reed, who is a professor at Georgetown. But all about, Black fatigue. And if you all don't know Mary Frances Winters, and this is just giving you all just a nugget to take away at the beginning, you got to Google her. This woman is phenomenal. She actually gives a definition for what I have been feeling for so many years in my life. And I like to start with this because it is very different when you are a Black superintendent trying to lead an organization and lead this work, when you are also fatigued by what's happening across our nation, and you have to continue to have that energy, right, to come back every single day giving 100%, which I do. But now I have a definition of what I'm feeling in regards to my psychological health. And, I will tell you all this, I tell this to our staff all the time, self-care is so important. Because that is the only way you're going to literally be able to get out of bed every day, coming back to be your selfless self. And I say selfless because we're in education, meaning that we're giving of ourselves to others without expecting anything in return other than students being able to achieve whatever goals they set for themselves. But Mary Frances Winters, who is somebody I am inspired by, and actually she's on our first podcast, Unapologetic Talk with the Soup. If you haven't checked it out, you've got to check out her podcast. Also, I just want to talk a little bit about being courageous and bold, because in order for us to change culture, and this is one thing that we have done in Alexandria City Public Schools, and I just say hats off to our school board for unanimously adopting our strategic plan, which I'm going to talk about really briefly with you all. You got to have that courage, and you got to be bold in regards to your leadership. When you're doing this anti-racism work, and many of you, if you're out there working on this already, you already know you're going to be faced with opposition, and you have to be ready for that, right? You have to be ready to have a counter narrative. You have to be ready to understand the history so that you can begin to determine what solutions you're going to need within your organization to overcome adversity. But it takes courage and it takes boldness. And, now I'm not going to jump from one mountain to the other, like this picture right here, but I am going to go out and speak my voice, because my voice is power, right? I'm going to use my position at any moment that I get to remove barriers for our Black and brown children, right? And to lift up the educational system for everybody, so that it's not just an even playing field, but that the students are engaged and able to thrive in this playing field. So just to give you a quick overview of our strategic plan, it was all about us dismantling our racial inequities and establishing a culture through our strategic plan. I said that 70% of our students that we serve are Black and brown children. Over 30% of them are eligible for free and reduced meals. And unfortunately, they have not always had a seat at the table. They have not always had their voices heard. And what this strategic plan was about was ensuring that we are speaking on behalf of the most marginalized student populations within Alexandria City Public Schools. And I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of how we're doing that, and then we're gonna be able to get into some questions. Strategic plan, folks, it is your roadmap. It's your roadmap to success. It doesn't just provide the mission, the vision, and core values, as I just mentioned. It also makes sure that you have specific priorities as an organization that you all have set, so you have something that you're striving for. It has a path to allow you to remove those barriers. Once you have identified them through your data or through your needs assessment within your organization, it is now your responsibility to make sure that you're setting a path to remove those barriers so that you can change that data in the best interest of our young people. So one thing that's important with our strategic plan, and why I think it is an exemplar for school divisions across this country, is the fact that we are leading with race at the heart of our work. And it specifically says that in our strategic plan. You will not find many strategic plans that say racial equity is the heart of our work, right? We have been very explicit. Our board, as well as our community, was adamant about making that a part of it. And the reason for that is because race is the root cause. It's the root cause of pretty much any and everything that is happening within our organizations. And when we're looking at issues with special education, or if we're looking at issues with discipline, or if we're looking at issues with academic achievement, you add race to that, and then you see a exacerbation of disparities. And that's why it's important for us to focus on that root cause. And when we do that, we will see us removing some of those barriers and seeing more equitable practices throughout all of our schools and our school systems. Also, racial equity for us, and I just want to define what we mean by it, it's when race does not determine the quality of life or the opportunities or outcomes of any of our students, right? And this is a very key component because we are saying that we should not be able to say, okay, because this person may be an immigrant from another country, that they're not going to be successful. We should be able to see them striving and excelling at the same levels as other students. They may have to have a little more time and more supports to make that happen, but their success should be possible. And we want to make sure in Alexandria City Public Schools that your race is not determining the quality of life that you can have or the opportunities that you can be afforded or the outcomes that you can seek or attain. We also wanted to have clear principles in regards to our work and making sure that we were data informed and we had voices at the table, and that's diverse voices, not just anybody. Sometimes the loudest voices in our community for us have been our white affluent families, and not that their voices don't matter, because all voices do matter, but we need to make sure that there's a diversified voice at the table, because if you haven't walked in someone's shoes, you can't speak on their behalf. Right? I always tell people when they're telling me how Black people feel and they're not Black, I say, you haven't walked in a Black person's shoes. So I would ask for you to say how you can support Black people, but you can't speak for Black people, right? You can't speak for someone that you have not walked in their shoes. We want to be equity focused. We want to make sure that we have that systemic alignment throughout our organizations. And we want to also have prioritization. And if you don't prioritize, everything is important. And if everything is important, nothing happens. Right? So you got to prioritize and set some specific key performance indicators to make that work. This is just laying the foundation for our equity work in ACPS. As I said, I'm a teacher first. I like to give you all things, that nuggets that you can use. I'm not saying this is the only way to do this work, right? I'm just saying this is how it has been working for us. This is kind of giving us the foundation that we need to do our equity work, but you got to tap into those power structures. If you all don't know this, if you get into a community, there are power structures in all organizations as well as all cities. You got to identify what those are, and you have to make sure you're engaging them in this work. They have to understand why you're doing this work, and you help them understand by sharing your data, which I think is key. You have to have unified planning. In ACPS, we worked with our city of Alexandria. At the same time they were doing their strategic plan, we made sure we had unified planning to ensure that we were not duplicating work, that our work was collaborative, that we had common goals that we were striving for. And that makes a huge difference when you're under attack, or when I'm under attack as superintendent, because I'm the face a lot of times of our organization. I know that I have allies, and I know other people within our city that are doing this work too. So I'm not out here by myself making this happen. So it's important to have that unified planning. I can't stress this enough. And if our chief of school and community relations, Julia Burgos, was on this Zoom right now, she would say, communicate, 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 right? It is so important for you to communicate out with your community. Now, I will say this. Some people will say that when you communicate out, that, oh, this is all you're focused on, because I get it all the time. They say, Dr. Hutchings, you only care about equity, or you're only talking about Black students. And I always say that our largest population is our Hispanic students. So no, I don't just care about Black students in Alexandria City Public Schools. I care about all students, right? But my job is to make sure that I am getting our messaging out around our strategic plan. And for us, equity is the heart of our work. So that means that is a part of my messaging that I share out with our community. It's not just something that Dr. Hutchings is passionate about, it's what our organization believes. So you got to be engaged with that. You got to be transparent. You have to be frequent, and there needs to be two-way communication opportunities. And then you got to make sure you have a living, breathing document. You know, I say that a lot of times organizations will have a strategic plan and they will put it on the shelf and not even open it up until the end of the year to look at your annual performance measures. You have to make sure that you are looking at your data. We have quarterly chats with our staff. We're going to every school and finding out their progress and their barriers so that they can be removed. We're not waiting till the end of the year to do an annual report. We're getting, those kind of like touch points along the way so that we can provide the necessary supports so that they can be successful. And then this is just finally a view of how we systemically align everything from our strategic plan to our budget priorities to our annual areas of focus that drive the superintendent's evaluation, and the superintendent's evaluation drives our school improvement plans and our department improvement plans, which leads to action steps, which leads to outcomes for kids, right? You got to make sure you have that kind of alignment, or you're not going to, actually see the fruits of your labor because you're now focused on things that might not matter in that particular point. And then as I close tonight, I want to just share with you all a copy, or this is kind of like a snapshot of our equity dashboard, because one thing that is important for any organization is to make sure that you are monitoring your progress. And one thing that we are doing, and this is our baseline data, we had COVID, folks, right? So I was just telling our team just recently, we can't compare our scores right now to prior to COVID. We got kids who are experiencing trauma. We have students who are wearing masks, not wearing masks, vaccinated, unvaccinated, people who've experienced death, loss in regards to employment or homes. And our students and our staff, they are in a very traumatic time, and that does have an impact on our student achievement. So this year is our baseline year in regards to our data, and our goal is to provide the necessary support so we can see progress in these particular areas. But this just gives you a snapshot. It's on our website. If anybody wants to check it out, it's real time, it's updated, every quarter with our new information. But this is how we keep track of our key performance indicators and our progress. And then I'm going to stop here, I promise. I just got to say a couple of, if I don't say this, then my team would be like, you didn't say anything about our accomplishments. So I do have to share some of our accomplishments, because people say, okay, you're doing this equity work, how is it having an impact? And I just have to tell you all this: in spite of the pandemic, in spite of us, having virtual learning and hybrid learning and all of the hodgepodge of things that have been going on with all the pivots we've had to make, we had the highest graduation rate in the history of Alexandria City Public Schools. It was at 91% with the class of 2021. That's huge because that is an area that we really have been focusing on, especially with our Black and our Brown students. We saw a decrease in our dropout rates from 14% to 5% in just a year. That's huge for us. So the work that we're doing is making a difference. Our surveys are showing that our parents are happy with their students learning, and that our staff, they're happy with being involved and with their colleagues in our schools. So we're going to just keep making sure that we monitor that, and that we get, or we keep our priorities at the forefront, and that we measure what matters. And this is a document that you all can also look at online, but it measures the things that matter, because so many school divisions are focused on testing at most of the time. And we know that there are things other than testing that matter within our organizations. And we want to make sure that our students and our staff are getting that information. So I had to be the teacher and professor in me first to give you all just some nuggets before we got into the Q&A, but I hope that this will set the stage for some of the responses that I may have, with questions that you all have, or questions that Dr. Moss may be asking during our Q&A time. So that concludes the first part of this presentation. I hope that you all walked away with something so that you can feel as if, you are getting some information to go back that's applicable to the work that we're doing in Alexandria.
Yeah, Dr. Hutchings, I just want to first name and affirm how much I appreciate your work, and just hearing how deliberate and intentional you've been, from setting strategic priorities all the way to really measuring what matters in this work. I could spend some time talking about things that you all measure that are not state testing and get really excited. But I really want to jump into some questions and really turn to you and think about how you led during this time, right? You've done a lot of good stuff for Black and Brown kids and families, right? At the core of your work has been leading with race at the center. You've centered Black and Brown young folk. You've also led during extreme uncertainty, right? You've had COVID, you've had folks mad about CRT, and we're going to talk about that second. But you've led and really maintained your core, which is this notion of anti-racism in education. What has kept you going? I've got to hear what has kept you going in all of this. Could you share with folks what's kept you going?
You know, I think what's kept me going is the simple fact that kids are still being left behind, right? We're still failing children across this nation, and sometimes we're failing them because of the color of their skin. You know, we're one of the richest countries in the world. And it's a shame that some of our kids are in dilapidated buildings, don't have the appropriate resources. There's food insecurity, you know, in many schools across this country. And healthcare is a whole nother piece, right? But I feel what keeps me going is the fact that we have not been able to provide every student a high quality education, as well as ensuring that they're engaged in that. But that's what keeps me going. Other than my faith, I think my faith is number one, because I'm a Christian, and I just believe that we're put on this earth to do work, and this is my life's purpose. So that makes me go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that and what keeps you waking up every day. I think it's really important for us to start there, but I think the reason why I started with that question is it took a lot of all those things that you just named to deal with the CRT debate and the backlash, right? I've told folks this is essentially a manufactured crisis, right? Where folks have really manufactured this issue around critical race theory in our schools. How did you deal with that? Was there a theoretical framework that you employed? Take us to that moment when it first happened, and share with folks, how'd you deal with that? That had to be a lot.
You know, first and foremost, I dealt with it, and we dealt with it in Alexandria by first the simple fact that most people didn't even hear the word CRT or critical race theory until it became this like political kind of like movement. And as educators, we were like, well, what are they talking about? When we say CRT, we're referring to culturally relevant teaching, right? Like that's what our CRT is educators. And what we were trying to do in our community was really educating folks on this critical race theory that everybody's saying is in schools, and we're trying to indoctrinate people. Hold on for a second. We just learned about this word just like you all are. But what we are doing is we're making sure that students are seeing people like them in our classrooms. We're making sure that when students are learning about the history of our history, meaning our American history, that they're hearing about all of the history and not bits and pieces of it. I mean, it got for us so intense, you know, which it was a lot of good outcomes that came out of it. But, you know, people were like, well, let's talk about Thomas Chambers Williams, which is T.C. Williams, which was the name of our high school, right? And they said, we got to change these names. And I had a lot of our white community members coming and saying, we got to change names. It's hurting Black and brown children. And I said, well, have we talked to the Black and brown children? Let's talk to the Black and brown children. So I used this debate that was happening in regards to CRT to elevate the Black and brown voice. And I said, let our Black and brown children tell us, now that you all have learned, because we educated our community through our identity project on Thomas Chambers Williams, right? And what we educated folks on is the fact that he was a staunch segregationist that never wanted Black and brown or children in the same or under the same roof as white children. And when we began to teach people and educate people on that in our community, now they had a reason to say why we needed to change the name. And it wasn't because people are changing names of segregationists, right? We wanted people to understand why this name was being changed. So we used this whole debate to develop some counter narratives with factual information that pushed a lot of things through, like name changes, like the adoption of our strategic plan. Because this happened in June of 2020 when our strategic plan was adopted. So we were already in the pandemic when these things were happening. So, I mean, I know that was a long-winded response, but I was trying to give you some key points that made a difference for us.
No, what was particularly interesting for me about your response was this notion of centering the voices of Black and brown students. I think part of what happened in this CRT debate was that much of the conversation was about what CRT would do to white kids.
That's right.
And very little of it was about what experiences Black children have had in schools with poor curriculum that, did not value or affirm their racial or ethnographic identity while they were in school. So would you talk a little bit more about how you shifted the conversation with board members, parents, advocates, and the like, who were insistent on centering white children as part of this conversation?
Yeah. One thing that we did is we just made sure, as I said before, that our Black and brown children had a voice, but we started educating our white families on Alexandria's history. We have a history of segregation in our city. Everyone knows us by Remember the Titans, right? Now, mind you, the championship was 1971. So it wasn't like it was a long time. Some of the football players from that championship team, they work at Alexandria City Public Schools. One of them works right on the same floor in my building, right, in our office. And what we wanted to make sure was that they were being educated on the simple fact that we have a rich history in Alexandria. And let me give you one point that I got, some controversy on. I was speaking publicly one time and I shared with, they said, well, we don't have racism in Alexandria, Dr. Hutchings. We're a diverse community and we embrace diversity and all people. And I said, right on Duke Street, in our city of Alexandria, we had the largest slave trade in America that sent Africans all over this country to work for free. It was founded in the city of Alexandria. So that means not only did we ship Africans across this country, but they also built the city of Alexandria. So racism was born in our city. For us to think that it still doesn't exist today is an issue, right? And then I had to start bringing up our student voices when they're saying, I don't feel welcome in AP classes. I don't feel like I belong in an honors course. Look at our disparities in regards to discipline. You have a white student that might have a drug issue and they get rehab. You have a Black student and you call the police. I mean, these are real situations and scenarios that were happening in Alexandria City Public Schools a couple of years ago, right? That we had to bring to the forefront to say we can no longer do that. And that was how we helped some of our white families. A lot of our white families, honestly, they are in support of this equity work. They're like ride or die, seriously. And I think of the civil rights movement. Without our white allies, we wouldn't have been able to make it through the civil rights movement. Black people didn't do that alone, right? So there are a lot of white people who are quote unquote woke and who want to help. And we need their help and their support. But what we can't do is we can't, tell you how to do it. You got to learn for yourself. And I'm speaking to white folks. You can't say, well, Dr. Hutchings, how do I do it? Well, you got to get yourself educated on this work. And you got to ask some tough questions and you got to lean into your discomfort because nobody has the right to be uncomfortable, right? So, no right to be comfortable, excuse me. So these are some of the points. I get so passionate, so I just start going on and on, but I want to get to your other questions.
No, you're good. I appreciate you naming the ways in which you all have moved to help our white colleagues really understand their role in this work. I also think that I have been deeply interested in how do we really move folks from this performative nature of this work. Folks are throwing the word anti-racism in education around like it's bubblegum, right? And saying that they are actually doing that work. How do we actually move leaders from talking about the need for an anti-racist model of schooling to really living that out in both policy and practice, right? I'm deeply interested in how did you start this conversation with your board? Like that this becomes something that we do in policy making and decision making and practice. Like, how do we move the conversation to that place? I don't think you just woke up with that cute and sexy strategic plan. I would imagine there had to be some difficult conversations that led you to that place. Can you take us there or share insights in that?
So I really can. So first and foremost, when I arrived here in 2018, one advantage I had was that I'm a product of Alexandria City Public Schools. So I went to T.C. Williams, I'm a graduate of T.C. Williams High School, class of 95, staying alive in 95 was our slogan back in the day. I was an advocate back then. I was the senior class vice president. I was prom king. I was involved in just a lot of the government relations at that time. So I have some historical context, right? I'm just wanted to make that point first. When I came in and I did my 90-day listen and learn kind of tour to really hear from our internal and external stakeholders in Alexandria, I started to hear a common theme around the achievement gap, right? And initially the conversation was about Black students in Alexandria. They were like, oh, the Black students, they're not getting their needs met, they're not performing, that type of thing. When we began to do our first data workbook, where we were looking at any disparities in regards to graduation or in regards to our state test data or discipline, suspension data, expulsion data, that type of thing, attendance data, we found that it was actually our Hispanic students that's needs were not being met. It was not our Black students. We also found that our Black students are not African-American. Our Black students are from Africa, majority of them, not African-American students, right? And we also began to share that data with our community and with our board. And that is what drove us getting to the specifics in regards to what are the specific subgroups or student groups that we need to focus on. What does our data, what story is our data telling us? So then it wasn't Dr. Hutchings' story or what I heard, from everyone else. What I heard from people also, it validated some of the data points. And then we had to begin to work out how are we going to address this? Because it was too much to address all in 1 year. So we said we're going to need 5 years to do this. If we got 5 years to address these challenges, how do we make that happen? And we kind of worked it from there. Another piece I want to just point out, and this is why I wrote the book, there are 6 specific steps that any school or school system has to put in place in order to become an anti-racist school system. 1, you have to know our history. If you do not know our American history and the history of your organization or the history of your city, you are not going to be able to determine what the solutions are for your school or school system. 2, you got to be committed to racial equity and equity, but racial equity specifically, because race is the root cause. 3, you have to dismantle the within segregation schools, the within school segregation that's happening in our school systems, meaning there are special ed classes where certain kids are being put into them, right? That's being segregated from the rest of the population. There are talented and gifted classes that have guidelines, and there's gatekeeping that happens in many schools across this country, right? You're gonna have to dismantle that. You're gonna have to make sure that your school discipline is different from policing. We're starting to run our schools in regards to discipline like people run prisons. So that's why they become prison pipelines, right? So we have to make sure that we are making sure the school is not like policing. We have to, 5th thing, because I'm on a roll. We got 5, I only got 1 more after this. But 5th thing is strategic thinking and strategic planning. And one thing that, I focus on the strategic planning piece, but the strategic thinking piece is just as important, because if you're not methodical with your approach and you're not strategic with the decisions that you're making, you're never going to attain those goals that you set in your plan, right? So you got to have that strategic thinking component. And then finally, what I started off with my presentation earlier on, you got to be courageous and you got to be bold, right? You got to be unapologetically you. One thing that you have to do in order to be unapologetically you is you're going to have to begin to figure out who you are as an individual. You're going to have to grow your professional capacity, right? You're going to have to be schooled on what's happening in our world in order to have the courage and the boldness and to be successful. So those are the 6 steps that are outlined in the book, that I really believe is going to help school systems across this country dismantle systemic racism in education.
I really appreciate you giving us this this taste test of your book. I'm sitting here thinking now, I need several copies and I just need to pass that book out to folks. I'm going to shift the conversation just a little bit, Dr. Hutchings. And Michelle Foster would be happy that I'm doing this, who wrote Black Teachers on Teaching. Vanessa Sadell Walker, who studies Black teachers in the rural South, would be happy that I'm doing this. My research focuses on the role of Black teachers. And so I'd love for you to spend some time talking about, Black teachers and Black educators who really helped you shape your practice as a leader, who have helped you shape your thinking, and who've also really pushed you to lead unapologetically with race at the center of your work. And you might even add a little bit about how those same Black educators help you to prepare to respond to the CRT debacle. But would love for you to call on the names of those warriors in this space tonight and how they've contributed to your school of thought.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And before I, talk to some of the warriors that are current, I want to talk about some of the warriors that were at the beginning stages of my life that were Black teachers that I was fortunate to have. My kindergarten teacher, Miss McKenzie, right? She was Miss Murphy at that time. She was the first woman to tell me that I could be the first Black president of the United States. And I believed her at 5 years old. I thought she was going to be my wife one day. I love me some Miss Murphy. I was like, this is a brown Barbie doll. She's beautiful. I still talk to Miss Murphy today, but she's happily married with her husband, Dr. McKenzie. Also, my second grade teacher, Miss Lewis, who told me that you could be an orator. I want you to speak to our class. She said I had to do Martin Luther King's speech in front of our classroom. She told me that I have the power of words. At 7 years old, that she shared that with me. That was a seed that she planted in me that changed the trajectory of my life. Sixth grade, Miss Johnson, another Black woman, right, who was no nonsense, that said, you will be a leader. You will always be at the front of this class, leading this classroom because people look up to you, right? And I want you to lead them in the right way. They were instilling these nuggets. Miss Barnwell in my high school, who was my senior counselor, who I still talk to today, just talked to her 2 weeks ago. But I didn't know why I was signed up to go to Old Dominion University, and that was the only school she wanted me to go to. I found out she got her master's from there, and she said they need more Black people, and you need to be the Black person that's going to be there. That's the only school that she told me I could go to, right? Which I got in, and I got a scholarship, at Old Dominion University. I did transfer to Hampton University, another story, and I went back. I graduated from ODU though. That's another time that I'll tell you all about that. But the people today who have really touched my life. Dr. Billy K. Canada, he was the first Black superintendent of Chesterfield County Schools and the first Black superintendent of state superintendent for Virginia, who was my mentor. He gave me a chance at 24 years old to become an assistant principal, and I didn't know anything at that time. And he said, I'm taking a risk, but you're worth the risk. And he's been a part of my life my entire career. Dina Simmons, who used to work at Yale University, who stepped out on faith and said, you know what? Things with Yale is not vibing with what we need for Black and brown children across this country. So she started Dina Simmons Consulting, her own business, right? That is like prospering, and it's big now. I can't even afford Dina now, right? Because her work is so important that a lot of people, they're just getting to know her. Velma Valbrun, let me get it right. Velma Valbrun with Valbrun Consulting, who works with Alexandria City Public Schools right now, who left her job out of Charlotte Mecklenburg to start her own work and to do anti-racism work and intercultural developmental inventory work across this country, and is phenomenal, right? Mary Frances Winters, that I'm going to keep promoting her book. I used her book when I was a teacher in a course at Howard last semester, her Black Fatigue book. I taught that at Howard. I'm using her book, We Can't Talk About This at Work, this semester at Georgetown University. These are Black educators that not only inspire me, but their work, it complements the passion that I have. And I say that, if you have what I call VIP, vision, integrity, and passion, right? If you possess those three qualities, anything is possible, especially when you're trying to dismantle systemic racism, but you also got to follow those 6 steps.
Come on, promote your book, right? The 6 steps, right? You got to get it. I appreciate you naming that. I never want to be in a space where we do not honor and, you know, give way to our Black warrior teachers who have paved the way for so many of us. And I think my next question is connected to that as well. You know, today, about 3% of the superintendents in this country are Black. And we know that we don't see a quick run to the superintendency or education period by Black folk. You see us today, we are still struggling to help our classrooms to look like our students. What are the implications for these staggering numbers in terms of Black school leadership on this anti-racism work, right? What are the implications for that, given that we're not having Black superintendents who are running to the seat or Black teachers who are running to the classroom? And if this narrative persists, right, what are the implications for ensuring that we have a system that protects and honors the dignity of Black children?
That's right. I'm gonna tell you right now, if we don't find a way to ensure that Black teachers continue to be in our classrooms and Black superintendents continue to sit in these seats, future generations will be doomed. Literally. And that's not just Black and brown, that's all. We have to make sure, and I made this statement recently, and it went viral a couple of months ago. Somebody was saying, oh, it's not a lot of Black people who are educators. And I said, it's not a lot of Black people who may want to work for your organization, right? We are graduating a lot of Black educators from our HBCUs, Howard University, Hampton University, Morehouse, Spelman, Virginia State, which we just have a partnership with them doing a teacher pipeline with Virginia State University out of Petersburg, Virginia, right? So does a Black educator want to work for you? And that is the question. So what they have to do and what organizations are going to have to do is we're going to have to start being more welcoming. I mean, we up here, we got crown laws about hair in this country, right? You can't even go to work and be yourself. Kids want to see people who look like them. Not only does it benefit our Black and brown children, it benefits our white children too, because there are some unintentional biases that white America and quite fondly Black and brown America have about Black people. And we have to change that narrative. The only way it could be changed is by us being in those classrooms. So what we do to change that is what I'm doing. I'm doing my aspiring superintendents. I teach a course with the aspiring superintendents program, right? Black counselors too, you're right, Dean Hoke, McCoy. You know, I'm teaching to make sure that we get that next generation of Black superintendents. It's a partnership with Howard University and AASA. You know, I'm making sure that instead of talking about everybody that's walking out of this profession, I'm talking about the people who are staying in this profession. Because we got folks that are showing up every day in spite of a pandemic, global pandemic, as well as our racial reckoning that we're dealing with in the United States of America. And they show up every day broken, but giving 100% to our kids. That's what the cover story should be about, right? Not everybody that's running out of this profession, because a lot of people are staying in this profession. So I just want to say that we have a mission and we have a responsibility to ensure that we are setting the stage for Black and brown teachers to be in our classrooms. And we're starting at the high school level. If we wait for people to declare a major, it's too late. And it changes with our staff. And I say this all the time. Educators, any educators out there, you all listen to me, please. We got to stop talking negatively about our profession, right? We got to stop telling our kids, oh, we don't want you to be a teacher like me. No, teaching is one of the best jobs in the world. We get to literally mold the world. We get to shift minds. We get to teach new concepts. We get to hear so many different voices. We get to give people points of view. We get to steer them in the right direction. We get to pick them up when they fall down. We get to encourage them and tell them that they can be something when somebody else in their lives has told them they can be nothing. It's a powerful job. And if we can believe that and start living up to that, I guarantee you that this world will be a better place. So until my last breath, That's my work, right? This right here is my work. This is what I'm doing.
Listen, Dr. Hutchins, you knew I grew up Pentecostal. If I were in my Pentecostal church right now, I'd be amening you and jumping up and down at all those profound things that you shared. So I do want to encourage our participants who are with us tonight to drop some questions in the chat for the balance of our time. We have about 7 minutes left. And as you prepare those questions, I'm going to ask Dr. Hutchins to just share a response to one curated question that we had, and then we'll be able to take maybe 2 questions from the participants. That final question that I have for you is, I'd love for you to reflect on a signature initiative, a signature policy change, or you can just name it, right? That you were able to operationalize as a result of you starting this work towards anti-racism in Alexandria City Public Schools. It is the thing that you're most proud of that you've been able to operationalize.
You want me to say just one thing? Because I think there's a lot of things.
Yeah, give us 2, and we'll buy your text and perhaps get the other 4 because they might be embedded in.
So one thing in particular for me, I think in us making sure that our students have a voice. We've set up structures where we have the superintendent student advisory. We now have 2 student school board members. We make sure that we're engaging our students, because truly your voice is power. And if we don't raise them up that way, they'll never know their voice, right? So we're giving them a platform to do that. I think that's a huge, and it's an amazing thing that happened since my arrival here. I also think us building capacity with our leaders, our educational leaders. We do equity work every month, even during the pandemic, right? It's not something, you can't have a one and done type deal, right? Every month we're doing this equity work. The same way I'm talking to you all right now is how we have our meetings each month. They'll, if any staff members that are on here, they'll tell you, like, this is Dr. Hutchins every time he talks to us, right? And that's something that brings me joy, because we're spreading this knowledge, and my job is to share the knowledge and to build capacity, and not to hoard information, right? It's to share information. But that's just 2 of the things. I can name 1,000 things, but I'm going to take that.
No, I appreciate that. We got to get that in that next book. So I want to save some room for folks to grab the next book. We do have one question. One of the participants asked, how can we continue to shift the debate regarding CRT, especially as it continues to be politicized, especially recently in the news with the Supreme Court nomination last week? And I just got to say, I am proud of my girl, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and how she handled last week. But the participant wants to know, how do we shift the debate regarding CRT?
We shift the debate regarding CRT by just doing our work every day, right? I don't even waste my time talking about CRT anymore. Like, I tell people, I'm like, that's not a pre-K-12 topic, right? And what we're doing is we're educating kids. We're teaching them our history. That's what teachers are supposed to do. We're supposed to teach factual information. So I don't even give people, the courtesy of going back and forth about the CRT debate, because it's not even worth my time. That's just to be honest, because it's so politicized that anything I say, my words are going to be taken out of context. So let's focus on American history. Let's focus on making sure that we're not liars in our classroom and having these mythical, historical narratives that are not true. I still remember when I was young in social studies, and they were saying for Thanksgiving, because the Native Americans and the colonists came together and they had this big old feast, versus the simple fact that the colonists was taking the Native Americans' land and making them their slaves until it didn't work anymore, and they brought Africans over there, right? So let's start having some real discussions so that kids of this generation can know the wrongs of yesterday, not to make them feel guilty, right? Because that's a huge debate on trying to make white folks feel guilty. It's not to make you feel guilty, it's to make you see the connections to what's happening today so that you can have solutions for tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Hutchins, we have 3 minutes remaining, and we don't have any other questions, but I do want to thank you for your time. I know our dean is coming back to close us out with final remarks tonight, but I have learned a great deal just listening to you. And so I thank you for your careful and steady hand at this work and what it means for children who look like me. And so at this time,
I'm not closing out. You close out. I'm just like so enjoying the conversation. We could keep going. So keep going. But we do need to close out. We have 2 more minutes. And I just want to say thank you, Dr. Hutchings, for this evening. This has been wonderful. On behalf of the School of Education, we are just thrilled. I learned so much tonight about you, about this work, about the future. Lots of nuggets of wisdom. And you were saying that you've been working at Georgetown, Howard. I heard all these other universities. We gotta work on getting you to AU more often. Right. All right. So Dr. Moss, if you will close us out tonight, that would be great.
Yeah, Dr. Hutchings, do you have any final remarks before we head out?
I'll just tell everybody, one, I just want to thank Dean Holcomb McCoy for the opportunity. And also you, Dr. Moss, thank you so much. Our fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, I got to give a shout out to that because you're an alpha man. And I want to thank everybody who's taken time out of their busy schedules to tune in from 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening. This work, it is going to require us to go above and beyond the call of duty. And I tell people this time and time again, 20 years from now, shame on you if you sit on the sidelines and watch everyone dismantle all of this work that we're trying to do in education, right? Shame on you if you allow people to remove words like equity or to remove curriculums or to get arrested because they're speaking to anti-racism or equity or being, I guess, not charged, but like, I just lost my train of thought. But like they're trying to threatening staff about you can't use certain words like in Texas and all these other places where they're having these in Florida where they're having these conversations. Shame on you if you don't do something. So we got to be bold enough. We have to be courageous enough to just step up, be unapologetic, lean into your discomfort, and be you. Because at the end of the day, guess what? You got to look at yourself in the mirror. And I want to be able to look in the mirror to say, I did everything I could to make a better tomorrow. Not I sat and watched everything go down. So those are my final words. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, it's been a plum-pleasing pleasure. And I look forward to the continued conversations outside of this venue. And we thank everyone that joined us tonight, and be on the lookout for future iterations of the Big Idea series hosted by the AU School of Education. Enjoy your night.